Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Nicole, and on today's episode, we're talking about tweens and teens, specifically how to help them manage anxiety. You know, kids in these age groups are experiencing more stress and anxiety than ever before. Even before the pandemic, we were seeing research showing that teens report levels of stress as high as middle-aged adults were reporting just 20 years ago. So kids in these age groups, they are feeling it, and especially after the last 2 years. And when kids experience anxiety, it impacts their life in lots of ways. As a parent, you may really feel at a loss to know how best to support your kid and help them create better mental health habits for themselves. This is what we're going to be exploring today with the help of Dr. Melanie McNally. Let me tell you a bit about her. She's a licensed clinical psychologist who helps Gen Zers become the superheroes of their life stories. She provides online support through teletherapy and coaching, online programs, and books that teach Gen Zers how to build self-confidence, manage anxiety, and achieve their goals. Dr. McNally founded Therapy Bootcamp, an app-based psychoeducational service for Gen Zers to get therapy tools delivered right to their phones. It's an 8-week program where they build self-awareness and develop coping tools, all while being able to DM Dr. McNally directly, right up the alley of kids in this age group for sure. Dr. McNally has worked in the mental health field since 2005 and teaches the skills, strategies, and tools she herself has used and continues to use. And on a personal note, she's a fellow Michigander, although she lives in the UP of Michigan and I live in Grand Rapids, but it's great to have someone else from the state of Michigan on the show. Welcome, Melanie. So great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I would love to start by actually having you share your story of how you came to be maybe in the field of psychology to begin with, but specifically focused on this age group, because honestly, this is not the most popular age group for people in the field of mental health to focus on, and yet that's really your specialty. And so I'd love for you to just share your journey of how you got here.
Yeah. So, I grew up dealing with a lot of anxiety myself, and I had no clue how to manage anxiety. I didn't even really know what it was. So when I was a tween and teen, I was struggling with worries about, my future, grades, my parents' constant fighting, like you name it, I worried about it. And on top of that, I grew up in a pretty dysfunctional home where we weren't taught how to deal with our feelings. And instead, we're taught that you hold everything inside and you never share with anyone anything that's going on. Yeah. So I really wanted to touch on this generation, that younger people, to teach them that there are things that they can do to feel better, because I myself didn't know how to do those things when I was their age.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. I think for many of us, we grew up in homes with really well-intentioned parents who were just operating in the way that their homes had operated, right? Which is, put a smile on. Everything's fine here. We don't talk about issues with each other, and we certainly don't talk about them with people outside the home. If we act like everything's fine, then it is fine. And that really does take a toll, doesn't it?
It does. We know that it's not good to hold things inside, and, but it's a balancing act. We don't want to overshare. We don't want to be, telling everyone everything that's going on, but we can't just hold our feelings inside. We can't just hold our anxiety inside, because it's going to come out somewhere, whether it's through physical symptoms, stomach aches, headaches. And that's what I dealt with a lot as a kid, was my stomach aches.
Yeah. Those physical things, I think so often parents don't recognize the anxiety or the stress or the emotional connection to that, right? And yet that brain body piece is so huge when a kid is feeling a lot of distress or anxiety or whatever it is that's going on. That does. The things that I see most commonly in tweens and teens are the stomach aches and the headaches. Right? Yeah. To the point where some of these kids get diagnosed with chronic migraines or chronic GI pain or irritable bowel. And that is so tied into their emotional experience.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many clients I've had come through the door because they had GI issues. They had gone to their pediatrician. They've had the scope done. They've had all of these tests, everything done where the doctors haven't been able to find anything. And then ultimately they decide, okay, this must be anxiety. But they're kind of ruling everything out first before they get to that point. And a lot of times it's unnecessary because we can figure out right away there is a lot of stress and anxiety going on in this kid's life, and we can give them tools. We can give them things that they can do to help themselves feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to pan out a little bit. We're going to get into specifics of all this, but I want to pan out and just really get your commentary on what you're seeing happening with tweens and teens right now. We've sort of got the general mystery that a lot of parents feel around kids at this age anyway, right? Like this tween and teen phase of development can be tricky for parents to understand and navigate, and for the teens themselves to navigate. But then we also have this overlay of the last 2 years of everything. And so I'm curious from your perspective, because this is really an age group that you focus on, give us the lay of the land. What do you think is happening for tweens and teens right now?
Yeah, I feel for them so much. I don't know if you're a Dave Chappelle fan, but he had it was in one of his stand-ups where he said that teens today, it's like they're experiencing 9/11 every day.
Yeah.
With the onslaught of information that they get delivered right to their phones, whether they want to or not. It could be a celebrity sharing something on Twitter. They're not even necessarily following a particular news source, but they're getting information through Twitter, through Snapchat, TikTok, and they are bombarded with constant influx of constant information on what's going on in the world. So with climate change, racial injustice, income inequality, what's going on currently with Russia and Ukraine,
Right.
like they're seeing all of that information. And then on top of that, they are getting information that is filtered through highlight reels, filters. So they're getting, images where people don't necessarily look like themselves, or kind of like avatar versions of themselves. And then it's somebody's highlight reel on top of that. So they're only seeing the good. And that contributes to them feeling like they're never going to be good enough or smart enough or popular enough. They always feel like they're missing out on something. And so with all of that, extra information that they're getting, it does lead to an increase in anxiety, a decrease in self-esteem and self-confidence. We saw at the end of 2021 when the Surgeon General released a report showing how anxiety and depression has doubled during the pandemic. But like you mentioned at the beginning, we know it was already on the rise before the pandemic even started.
That's
so
right.
there's so many factors that are contributing to an increase in these mental health issues.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on a lot of the issues of bombardment with information and 24/7, access to social media and all of that, because I think, it's always the phase of development that we call, being a tween or a teen has always been tough. It's designed that way naturally, right? Like it's this phase of life where kids are navigating their own individuation from their parents, but also still needing support. Like it's a tricky time of development. I feel like as both a parent of older kids and also a professional working with kids, that it really is more difficult to be a tween or teen today than it was when I was a tween or teen. And it's always been hard, but I feel like it's much harder in today's world.
Absolutely. And you said something too about the adolescent development period where, adolescents already feel like they're on stage, that they're on center stage.
Right.
And with social media, they are on center stage.
Mm-hmm.
So it's putting a spotlight on that developmental issue that already exists. But I agree. I do think it's a harder time. I was talking about this with somebody just the other day. I'm 45. So when I was a kid, Desert Storm happened.
Yep.
I only knew about that if my parents had the nightly news on, or if I happened to, if a teacher happened to mention it at school.
Yep.
That was it. Kids today, with the Russian invasion in Ukraine, I have kids that are getting live updates on Twitter.
Yeah.
It's like a football game. They are watching a play-by-play.
Yeah.
They are getting information on TikTok. They're seeing videos, and who knows if some of those videos are real or if they're fake, but they're getting all of this information in real time as it's happening. And that can lead to a lot of feelings of helplessness. We're just sitting here watching something really horrific go on, and yet we can't really do much as an individual citizen or as a kid.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, as adults, we struggle with navigating the constant onslaught of information. And here we're talking about kids who still, their brain is still developing, their prefrontal cortex is still in major development mode, and expecting them to be able to process all that. It's so much.
It is.
One of the things I'd love to have you touch on is, so far we've talked around like stress, anxiety. Kids will use those words, to describe things, but I'd love to have you break down for us and for parents, how do we tell the difference between, stress, which can be good, right? We need to have some amount of stress, and anxiety, also recognizing that some anxiety is healthy and normal. But how do we tell the difference? And maybe even more specifically, how do we know when anxiety is really becoming a problem for our child?
Yeah. So, first we have to know the symptoms of anxiety. So we have to know what those are. And so symptoms of anxiety include, constant worrying or excessive worrying. And so that could be worrying about grades, the future, friendships. It could include social worries about what other people think of me, being judged, or public performance. It can include some of those physical symptoms that we talked about earlier. So anxiety can mean stomach aches, headaches, GI distress. There might be avoidance behaviors where tweens and teens aren't participating in things like friends' birthday parties or auditioning for a school play because they're so anxious. They might show inflexible behaviors or a lot of rigidity, where they have a really hard time when things don't go as planned. In younger kids, that could even look like difficulty transitioning from one activity to another. So just a lot of, noticing those types of symptoms, trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep. Those can also be symptoms. And so when we know those, and then looking at ultimately, how do those symptoms impact their level of functioning? So like you mentioned, it's kind of a spectrum. Anxiety can be helpful, but then it can kind of move down that spectrum and it can cross the line and become harmful. And so looking at, their main areas of functioning, which would probably be home, school, and friendships, and how is it impacting them in each of those areas? So if it's causing them to miss out on doing things that they really want to do. Your kid loves theater and loves performing, but they won't audition for the school play.
Right.
That could be a sign that it's crossed that line and it's harming them. So if it's preventing them from functioning, if they're nervous about a test, that anxiety could be good because it could push them to study a little harder, to ask to work with a tutor. But if they get to a point where they can't sleep the night before the exam, or they have such a bad stomach ache, they can't go to school, or their mind goes blank when they sit down to take it, now we know it's crossed that line into that harmful territory.
So it's the context is really important too, right? Like as you went down those list of symptoms, I could imagine a lot of parents listening going, oh my gosh, my kid's done all those things. Yeah, my kids have all too. And the key is, are they appropriate in the context, and are they happening for a prolonged period of time, right? Like I'm thinking of a situation with one of my own kids the other day who was feeling quite a bit of anxiety around some school assignment issues. And it was very appropriate. His anxiety was contextually very appropriate because he had slacked off. He had not been managing things well, and he had kind of dug himself in a hole, and he knew it. And it's like, right, anxiety is the appropriate response here. And he was able to think through it and work his way out. So the context is critical, that these things happen to every kid, but are they getting in the way of normal functioning? And even like thinking about being worried about things. And I think about what's going on now. I think about what's gone on the last 2 years with COVID. I think about what's going on now with, this Russia-Ukraine situation. It's normal and expected for kids to be experiencing some increased level of anxiety. It would be sort of weird if they didn't, right? But it's this issue of, is it getting in the way? And is it more than we would expect? And I think that's really the piece that you're talking about is important for parents to be in touch with.
Definitely, because they are going, like you said, they are going to experience anxiety. We all do. It's a part of life. But how impactful is that anxiety, and is it preventing them from doing the things they want to do? If they're it's like with adults watching news around the clock,
right?
And feeling just like a constant state of stress, and they're agitated, they're irritable, they're not sleeping well at night. Obviously, that's anxiety that is not healthy. And, if that continues, then we're starting to consider an anxiety disorder. But you also mentioned the idea of how long it goes on. And that is a key indicator there. It's not something where if we experience it once, we have anxiety, because obviously we all experience anxiety. So that's inevitable.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, one of the things I'd like to have you touch on before we get into like what we do with this, I think it can be tricky for parents with tweens and teens to look at their behavior sometimes and to sort out how might anxiety be showing up. And, one thing I'm thinking about is I'll work with kids who parents will say, well, they're angry all the time. They're just angry all the time. They're hostile. They don't want anything to do, whatever. And they're pinning it on like an anger management problem. And as we dig into it, it's like, actually, the anger is a cover for this is a severely anxious kid. And I think that can really like be surprising for parents. We're just looking at the external behavior. So I'm curious along those lines, what are some of the tricky things that you see, or the things that can trip parents up, where maybe what they're seeing, they're attributing to one thing where actually it might be anxiety?
Yeah, I think you touched on the key one, which is anger or irritability.
Yeah.
I'll hear a lot from parents about just a constant state of irritability. And sometimes with teens, it can even look like apathy, where they are just, saying they don't want to, they're not interested in social relationships. They're not interested in doing certain things, and the parents might see it as like, they don't want to have friends. They're not interested, but really they actually do want to have friends. They do want to be social. They're just so anxious about going over to a friend's house, or they're really anxious about approaching a new friend group, or who to sit with at lunch. So it can look like apathy. It can look like irritability and anger. We talked about the physical stuff, which a lot of times like that shows up behaviorally, where the kid will deny left and right that they're nervous about anything, but yet every Sunday night there's a stomach ache.
Yep.
Or after a long weekend, they have a really hard time going back to school on that Tuesday or whatever. So looking at those types of things too. And sometimes even sadness can actually be a front for anxiety, where kids, they're worried about so much. They don't know how to manage those feelings of worry. They feel the weight of the world, and it just ends up feeling like sad because they feel helpless. They don't know what to do. You mentioned earlier with procrastination with your child, and that sometimes can show up where if somebody's so anxious about something, they'll put it off and put it off and put it off. So they're so anxious about their speech they have to give in school. They're scrolling on social media. They're finding every other thing, they're organizing their room, they're baking cookies, and they're doing everything possible. And then, the night before the presentation, now all of a sudden they're freaking out because they were so anxious about it.
Yeah, excellent points. And the other piece that is coming to mind as you're talking about that is, and this tends to be for older teens, although certainly we can see it in tweens and younger teens, is the whole issue of substance use too. That very often when I have a kid who comes in who the parents are concerned about substance use, at the root of that is a lot of unmanaged anxiety, a lot of unnavigated emotions, like a lot of that. And I think that behavior is also really misunderstood in kids. And the focus is on, don't do this. This isn't healthy, whatever. Like you have this addictive behavior. And really, as we know now, like all of that kind of addictive behavior is rooted in trying to cope, trying to manage a lot of things, anxiety being one of them, right?
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. You see that a lot with alcohol. It kind of ease, they might feel like it makes them a little bit more social, or it gets rid of that social anxiety. I see it a lot too with, marijuana use, or with how easy it is now to
Right.
see products.
Yeah.
So using that as a way to cope with those feelings of anxiety. But even social media, that addiction, and using that as a way to avoid participating in life. Video gaming can be a way to avoid participating in life, a way of coping with an anxiety. So absolutely.
I'm so glad you raised those, because those are big ones. And I think that we tend to, as parents and even professionals, focus on the external behavior without stopping to make sure we're really having empathy for what's going on underneath that, for why our kids are struggling with that stuff, because that's really where the magic happens, right? If we can have empathy and understand that what's really at the root of this is a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty, it gives us better ways to approach it than just focusing on the behavior of like, I can't believe you're using drugs in my house, or how could you do this, or you have to go to school, or why aren't you getting, good grades? It's like when we can have the empathy for, oh, this is actually a scared kid. I think that goes a long way as a parent, doesn't it?
It does. And I think that starts with, the parents who are able to create an environment that's very non-judgmental, which I know can be really hard to do, but having that space where a kid feels like they can talk about the things that they're feeling anxious about, and they know they're not going to be shamed or judged for doing so. And so then that's like a proactive way of cutting off some of that stuff before it even becomes an issue, because they know they have a place where they can share what they're feeling. They can talk through what they're thinking, and they know, mom, dad, or whoever isn't going to judge me for this. They're not going to ridicule me or belittle me. And that can head off some of those issues.
Of course, that requires that we as the adults are willing to acknowledge and manage our own anxiety about all of that, right? Which is often where that becomes problematic, doesn't it?
Yes, you do see anxiety get passed down for sure. Sometimes it can be a little bit of a learned behavior.
Yep.
And, you'll see if even not even if a mom or dad is really anxious, but even how they talk about other people or situations in their life. So if they're, making fun of, let's say somebody who, I don't know, an Olympian who didn't do so well.
Yeah, right.
And they're kind of mocking that or talking about like, oh, what a shame they failed. That is information that kid is now internalizing. Like, okay, failure's bad. Or if I make a mistake, all right, I cannot go to mom or dad with that, because that's how they view it. So they're internalizing a lot of that dialogue too.
An excellent point. Excellent point. And of course, in order to be able to have open dialogue with our kids and accept how they're feeling, we have to not let ourselves be triggered by it, right? I know that sometimes parents, when their kid starts expressing their anxiety or their emotions, parents, out of the best of intentions, start to get triggered, like, oh my gosh, something's wrong. And it's out of our own distress and anxiety that we shut down those conversations, or we try to make that go away because we can't handle it. And then that just creates this problem for the kid then, where they're like, I have nowhere to go with this.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I actually just had this happen the other day with a client where something had happened and she must have triggered her dad's anxiety, and she didn't turn in an assignment. It had a really big impact on her grade. But when her dad was upset about it, it ended with him yelling at her about being able to pay taxes as an adult.
Right.
And
she's
like,
like, wait, what?
I don't even know what taxes are. And, and now she's in trouble for not knowing how to do that in the future.
Right.
But, you could see where he came from,
Right.
you kind of see that snowball effect where if you can't turn things on time, you're not going to be able to have a job. And, you could just see that ball rolling down the hill and getting bigger and bigger. And, and I'm not a parent, so I don't know what that's like.
Right.
And I'm sure it's really tough to manage, but having to be able to intercept that snowball before it rolls down the hill and gets to that huge, massive one, and being able to manage it. And if that means, parents need to step out of the room and take a break, that's totally okay. And in fact, that's actually great. You're modeling a really great coping mechanism.
Yeah. Or even to acknowledge after the fact, like, wow, I really went off the rails with that one. I got really triggered by that. And suddenly I went into future mode and started talking about taxes. And I realized now that wasn't helpful. And let's talk about that again. And actually, I think we're so afraid as adults to acknowledge that stuff with our teens, but actually they really respect us for it. And they appreciate our ability to reflect on our own stuff and come back and communicate with them in that way. And I think a lot of adults don't realize how powerful that is.
Yeah, I have so many teens where they will tell me, when they've had a fight with a parent, and when the parent does come back and say, you know what, I screwed up, they will talk about how meaningful that conversation was. It brought them closer to their parent. Versus a teen who will share some sort of encounter like that with their parent, and the parent doesn't own up to the mistake that they made.
Right.
And the teen they are well aware of what happened. And now they're seen as okay, mom or dad can't apologize. They always have to be right. And so again, they're kind of, that parent is setting the stage for an environment that's not very conducive to openness or conversation.
Yeah. Let's get into things that parents can do to help. So we've talked about what the signs of high stress levels and problematic anxiety are, how we notice that, where we maybe go wrong or are a little misguided in our approach with that. So what are some of the top things that you advise parents to do to help kids in this age group?
So first, I think parents need to role model the good mental health habits that they want their teens to actually use. So when we think of, the foundational parts of good mental health, we think of sleep. That is a foundational part for good mental health for all humans. I mean, there's a reason why sleep deprivation is used as a form of torture.
That's right.
We need sleep. We need daily movement. We need social interaction. We need some sort of extracurricular or a hobby. We need to turn off our devices before bed. So parents need to model that type of behavior themselves, because if you're preaching to someone else, you need to, turn off your phone before bed, but they come in your room and you and your partner are laying in bed scrolling on your phone, you're not making a very good case. So parents need to use those same foundational aspects of good mental health and model them. And then also make them a part of the daily routine, talk about them. Where if a parent misses their yoga session or they miss their evening jog, to mention gosh, I noticed I'm much more irritable tonight because I missed my exercise. I didn't get any physical movement in. And that's such a great tool to help me manage my own anxiety. So to talk about those things so that it's just incorporated into daily life, and you're also educating teens on really good daily mental health habits.
I find with kids in these age groups in particular, that modeling and that just raising things in casual day-to-day interactions is so powerful, because they're at this developmental stage where they do have sort of this tension with us of I don't want to listen to what you have to say. If you tell me I have to do this, I'm not going to do it, which is kind of true of all kids, but is especially true of kids in these developmental stages. And so I feel like what you're saying around us focusing on ourselves and being a model and sort of coming in like the side door with some of these things can be especially useful for kids in these age groups.
Definitely. And car rides, I feel
Yes.
like car rides are like the secret portal,
True.
where, parents will always talk about having these great conversations in cars. And it makes sense because you're a little distracted. You're not sitting down at the kitchen table facing one another, having this really intense dialogue. You've got other things to kind of like interfere with the conversation and to give them a little bit of a break if things get too intense. So using those types of moments, it doesn't have to be, these intense like family dinners every night, or, we need to have these moments together where we, these great conversations. They can happen in these little snippets here and there. And then just making sure though, that parents also are doing the things like modeling it. So even if you're not saying it, you're not saying what you're doing to manage your mental health, but they see you doing it. They're like, oh, mom, there she is doing her yoga again.
Right.
And so they just it becomes a norm for them.
Love it. So us as the adults getting clear on the importance of these daily mental health habits and then modeling those and instilling those in our kids. Okay, awesome. What's next?
Well, another great tool. So one of my favorite tools for teaching teens and tweens how to manage anxiety is a tool that's rooted in DBT. So I don't know if you're a fan of DBT, but I love it.
Yep.
Yeah. And one of the things that they teach in there is mindfulness, and they break it down into 3 really easy, digestible steps to practice. And so I use this a lot because it's so helpful. But when they talk about mindfulness, they talk about that we observe, we describe, and we participate. Mm-hmm. So first, we just observe what's happening to us physically. We're just kind of noticing whatever's going on internally. We're noticing any thoughts that we have. Next, we describe these things to ourselves. But when we describe, we do it without labeling. We're not judging ourselves. We're not shaming ourselves. And then we participate. We fully participate in the present moment. Mm-hmm. So when a parent's kind of teaching this to their kid and how to use it, a good example is thinking of when you're in class. Let's say you're sitting in class and you're starting to feel really weird in class. You're getting a little nervous. So first, you're just going to observe. You're going to notice, what's going on internally. And as you're noticing it, you're describing it to yourself. So you're saying like, I'm getting butterflies in my stomach. I'm starting to feel hot. I feel a little jittery. But we're not labeling it. We're not calling it anxiety. We're not judging ourselves. We're not saying, oh, I'm so dumb. Nothing's even happening. Why do I feel this way? All we're doing is just kind of noticing these things. And then we fully participate in whatever's going on. So if I'm sitting in class, that might mean I'm going to pay attention to what the teacher's saying. Or maybe that means I'm going to look around the room and notice different colors. Or if there's a window I can look out, I'm going to like look at the clouds going by. Or maybe I'm going to notice smells, and if you're in a high school classroom, there's probably a nice variety of odors.
Yep.
So you're going to notice anything that's like sensory and paying attention to those things. And it's just a way to kind of get you into the present moment and out of your head a little bit. And so parents can teach that tool, and they can practice it at home when you're, cooking, or they can practice it when they're doing schoolwork or listening to music, and then encourage them to use it when they're at school or when they're hanging out with friends, reminding them of that tool. And, when I teach it to teens, I always say, this isn't going to make your anxiety disappear. It's not a magic button where poof, you feel great. The idea is that it's going to decrease it to a level that feels much more manageable.
I think that's such an important point, because often parents and kids will say, well, I'm going to make the anxiety go away. And it's like, well, you're a human, so that's not going to happen. We need to shift our relationship to our anxiety. And I love in the strategy that you just shared, what we're really helping kids do there is to get out of the story spinning in their head and just grounded in the reality of what's actually happening in the environment. Because with anxiety, we just tell ourselves all kinds of stories. and we believe them. And so I love that when you say, let's focus on the sensory, let's focus on, what do we smell right now? What can we, what are we feeling? What are we looking at? And that gets us out of those stories, which is such a powerful and a simple and free tool that all kids can learn to use. And I feel like so many adults who I've worked with over the years say, boy, I wish someone would have taught me these things back when I was a kid. It would have saved me, would have helped me understand myself so much better. It would have saved me so much difficulty. And so what a gift to be able to give our kids these tools now.
Exactly. And that's exactly why I started working with tweens and teens, because that was exactly what I needed. That would have helped me so much when I was feeling nervous and anxious at school. But I do encourage, parents when they're talking with their tweens and teens to teach them that it's going to take practice. It's a skill that you're building. You're probably not going to get it on the first try. It's just like, when you started playing soccer, you couldn't just run out on the field and start dribbling. It took a lot of practice and a lot of work. And it's the same thing when we're learning how to manage our anxiety. We have to put in a little bit of work. We have to practice and think of it as a skill that we're building. The more we do it, the easier it'll get.
Yeah, so true. How about one more simple, maybe unusual, or something that parents might not think of, something that they can start doing or that they can teach their kids to do?
A really simple and easy one is just asking, what's the worst case scenario here?
Yeah, right.
So a lot of times parents will avoid asking that question because they think that they're going to cause their kid to think about that.
Right.
But newsflash, they're already thinking of that.
Yeah, right.
Maybe they just haven't shared it.
Yep.
So you are just asking them like, okay, what's the worst that could happen here? And you have them play it out, the worst case scenario. And then you come up with a plan. Like, okay, so if that were to happen, what would you do? How would you deal with that? And it's a really quick and easy thing that just lets kids understand that, first of all, the worst case scenario usually isn't as scary once we say it out loud.
Right.
A lot of times it's ridiculous and we say it out loud and then we laugh because we realize how absurd it is. But then also we can handle hard things. Mm-hmm. So even if everyone laughs at me when I stand in front of the room, like, okay, what would you do? How would you handle that? I guess I would just kind of stand there, or maybe I would start laughing at myself too, because I had just mispronounced a funny word, like letting them see that they have the internal resources to handle hard situations.
Perfect. And I think the modeling of that too, like even for us to share like, oh, I'm really stressed about this. Okay, let me think through what's the worst thing that could happen here. What would I do? I think that's so powerful. Before we wrap up, I have one more question because this comes up a lot. A lot of people in DMs on social media or an email ask me, especially with this age group of kids, when parents recognize that their child is struggling with anxiety or whatever mental health issue to the point where they've really exhausted their resources. They need some professional help now, whether it's just because parents feel like, okay, we really don't know how to handle this, or we're doing a lot of good things and our kid is still really struggling. We need some professional help. That can be tricky because parents will say, my 14-year-old or my 16-year-old or whatever won't go to see somebody, or how do I talk with it? What do I do when my tween or teen says, I don't have a problem, you have a problem, I'm not going to see anybody. And so I'm curious, just if you can speak into that for parents who maybe are in that situation.
Yeah. So one thing is to see if there is any buy-in at all, any problem that they are struggling with that maybe you don't think it's a problem, or you don't see it as connected to the overall issue. But if there's any little buy-in that you can get to just get them in the door, to let the therapist kind of work their magic.
Right.
So if it's something where, maybe they're complaining because they want a boyfriend, you don't see that as a huge issue. And in fact, you don't want them to have a boyfriend, but that's important to them.
Yeah.
And so maybe approaching it like, this is somebody who can help you figure out why it's been so hard to find a boyfriend. And maybe that's kind of the buy-in, and see if they can develop a relationship with the therapist and build it from there. If they are really, really resistant to talking or to opening up to somebody, even approaching different formats, I have found that teletherapy has helped a lot because there's a screen between us and they feel less vulnerable, less embarrassed. So seeing if maybe teletherapy is more up their alley versus in person, or vice versa. Or if there are some workbooks that, there's a ton of great workbooks for teens. When you go on Amazon and you just type in like teen anxiety workbooks, you can find some really great ones that are rooted in evidence-based strategies, and, and just kind of passing it off to them and seeing if maybe that would get the ball rolling to get them to start thinking about things.
Yeah, I think those are great. And ultimately what I say to parents too is, look, if you try a variety of things and you absolutely are unable to get them in the door, there's great benefit in you as parents seeking out. You go to appointments, you seek out the professional help to help you as the parent know how to engage and respond and structure things differently. And there's great value in that, even if you can't get the kid in the door.
Yeah. And sometimes it's even, the parent getting support too, because
right.
they are so stressed out, managing their child's behavior,
Right.
or maybe the poor mental health of the child is causing so much turmoil at home. And so it gives them some extra support there too. Definitely.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I know that you have a unique option that you offer for kids in this age group to be able to get some support around this. And I think in a really smart way, because as you said, Gen Zers, like kids now in that age group, they really prefer to do things sometimes in an online format, those types of things. So as we wrap up, I'd love for you to share where people can find out more about your work, and especially like the boot camp that you offer and what you have available for people.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, if anyone's on Instagram, you can always follow me. I'm at Dr. Melanie McNally over there. My website is destinationu.net, and that's YOU. And then I have a therapy boot camp, which you can find on my website, or you could type in destinationu.net/therapy-bootcamp. And my therapy bootcamp is an app-based program. It's 8 weeks long, so it has a start and an end date, and they are getting evidence-based strategies to help with building self-awareness, learning coping tools, working on communication skills. And so there's cohorts for it. And when you're in a cohort, you have access to a group chat. You're able to DM me and talk with me about it, or about any questions or issues that you're having throughout the boot camp. And so, and like I said, it's an app, so it's all right on their phone or whatever their preferred device is.
Awesome. Love it. Such a needed thing, such a great opportunity. So I encourage everybody to go check out what Melanie's doing over there. Thank you for the work that you're doing with this age group, because it's so needed more than ever before. And also thanks for spending time with us today. This was great.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
And thanks as always to all of you for listening and for being here. We'll catch you back here next time.